Hi, this is Lenny Pfeffer, President of the Dorchester County Council, and you're tuned in to Mako's Conduit Street Podcast. Whether you're a Maryland resident, a government official, or just someone interested in learning more about public policy in Maryland, this podcast is for you.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson. Michael, it's Thursday, January 18th. I've already testified on 3 bills today. Things are moving along quickly here in Annapolis. Things are getting into full swing. How's Michael Sanderson holding up? And what session is this for you, Michael? Do you have a number?
This feels like it, right? It feels like we're already in mid-session form. So I came to town in 1991. I had a special session, I think, that fall, but my first legislative session was in 1992. So that's a lot. So, anyway, that's 30 something. Yeah, that's a lot.
It's just, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but it's a lot. It's a lot. We'll just say it's a lot of experience and working through the tough issues. But Michael, one of the foundational pieces each session is the fiscal plan, right? And that just dropped yesterday, this week. So we have a sense of what the governor is proposing here. As a reminder, the governor introduces a budget. The General Assembly traditionally has not had a lot of power to move things around in the budget, but now they do, thanks to a constitutional amendment from a few years ago. The General Assembly now has a lot more say in the budget process. So while the governor introduces his budget, it's really just the opening salvo. And again, because the General Assembly has more authority, they can put their fingerprints on this thing if they want to, right, Michael?
Yeah, I think this looks like it'll be the first year where we see that process really take shape. So too soon to say exactly what that's going to look like, but we're in the starting phases right now. And honestly, there's a lot of attention on fiscal issues. Both of us are budget nerds. And so we get all excited when these bills drop and the budget proposal itself and the reconciliation bill and all that stuff. We'll talk through that stuff. But all these bills come out, it's always a big moment for folks like us. But people have been thinking about what the governor's budget for this coming year would look like, really going all the way back to the Mako summer conference in August, I think. He gets a window to close out the conference with some comments, and frequently the governor will attend that conference and use that as an opportunity to say, hey, this is the next big thing we're going to tackle. You announce a big program or you announce a big priority or something like that. And Governor Moore used that stage and that big audience and all those reporters to basically say, this is going to get tough. The fiscal largesse that was out there, for a variety of reasons and in a variety of specific ways, looks like it's eroding, and this is going to be a tough budget year ahead. So buckle up. And I don't know, that had all of us sort of maybe anticipating the drop of this budget with a little more attention than usual, I think.
No doubt about it. And, since then, we've seen proposed transportation cuts. We'll get into all of that. We're going to cover that in detail here. There are a lot of things just kind of thrown in this pot that are concerning. But of course, we know the governor, they had a tough fiscal climate to build a budget, right? We know that all the federal money is dried up, and that's sort of a shock to the system. So trying to fill all those gaps and make everything work, it's certainly a gargantuan task, and we understand that. And Michael, what we mean by the fiscal plan is really in 3 bills. We're talking about the budget bill, the BRFA, or the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, and then the capital budget. So these are 3 separate bills that work together to make a balanced spending plan for the year that starts on July 1st. So the new fiscal year will start on July 1st, and that's when this budget goes into effect. So Michael,
right.
I said BRFA, we've said that before, but it's always good for a Michael Sanderson primer on the budget versus the BRFA.
Yeah, it's like the inside baseball terminology here that Annapolitan types know these terms, but not everybody does. So first of all, the capital budget is its own bill, and that's basically the authority for the state of Maryland to issue bonds, borrow money, and take the proceeds from those bonds and build buildings. Basically, making big structural infrastructure type investments, a building on a university campus or that sort of thing. All that sort of stuff is in a capital budget. And the theory is you pay for capital projects over a sizable share of their lifetime rather than doing so in cash. Although sometimes we do pay as you go capital as well. So capital budget sort of on its own, and it's its own spending plan. But the plan for this year is really in two bills. The budget bill is special. The budget bill is one bill introduced that is literally every single state agency. It's an authority for the governor and the state agencies to spend money up to certain dollar amounts for various line items of things and so forth. So that's one really long bill accompanied with historically these big stacks of books. We're increasingly getting out of the universe of stacks of books and turning into online reports, but there's lots and lots of detail that accompanies the budget bill. But all the budget bill can be is a 1-year spending plan. Now, in a tough year like this, what usually happens is the governor will introduce a reconciliation bill. This is a normal piece of legislation that goes through the regular process, not the special process just for the budget spending plan. A reconciliation bill is introduced to say, these are things that we need to change. We're going to move some money out of this fund and put it into the general fund, and we'll transfer money from here to there. And then we're going to change the law that requires this funding or changes that funding or whatever. All those things need to be done in a bill introduced by the governor, engaged by the General Assembly, and then passed by the General Assembly through their normal process. So you put all that stuff together, it's part of a plan. If you want to make any permanent changes or do something more than just spend money for the year ahead, it's got to be in a bill rather than the budget. And so you get a ride-along Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, which has turned into BRFA. And we all, big BRFA and that stuff like that. It's kind of a point of amusement around town. So that's the difference between the two. But we're back to having a reconciliation bill this year because it's a tight budget year.
Right. And, we've had a reprieve from the BRFAs and, all the federal money was here. So there really wasn't a need for a BRFA. But those good times, if you will, are gone. All the federal money is gone. And in the BRFA, Michael, we typically pay a lot of attention to the BRFA because that is where a lot of the mandated spending changes are made. And for county governments, a lot of our funding comes through mandated spending, through formulas. And if they want to adjust the formulas or the mandates, they do it through the BRFA. And so always something that we're paying attention to and reading through closely. But Michael, I want to get in. I mentioned transportation, and that is really, I think transportation issues have stolen the show, if you will, in Annapolis. They've gotten a lot of coverage. We know that the governor, the administration came out right before the MACO Winter Conference, actually, and announced a multi-year plan to cut billions of dollars from transportation, including for a lot of the things that we care about and legislators here care about, local projects, roads, transit. And so that really, I think, set the tone, not only for the Winter Conference, but for the session. And it's getting tons of attention. I'm going to link a tweet thread that I made right before the Winter Conference to kind of talk about what was on the table and how it would affect counties. So we'll put that in the notes. But Michael, the first part of the debate has already sparked up this week in the House Appropriations Committee. They had a detailed briefing on the proposed cuts to transportation. You were there and in fact got to be on the first panel. So Michael, set the tone and tell us about that hearing, how it went, and how you see this now moving forward, at least in the House, what tone they set and what they were asking from local governments.
Yeah. So this is in the House of Delegates. The Appropriations Committee is the committee that focuses on the budget and personnel issues and some other stuff that are related to the spending plan. But so these are the folks who are hip deep in the budget and all the things that we're talking about here. They carved out a whole afternoon to talk about the proposed cuts to transportation, and in particular, how they would be felt in local services. And we had wave after wave of the county engineers and public works professionals and so forth, sort of explaining, we don't have anywhere to go to fill in these gaps. This is going to mean a loss of service and so forth. So it was a good overall context for the committee to sort of, this feels like it's the first salvo in what's going to be maybe a couple years of difficult budgeting. And so the first bit lands right around at the Winter Conference. Boy, that was the talk of the town. When we were at the Hyatt in Cambridge, we had elected officials and professionals and budgeteers and so forth up and down the hallways talking about, oh my gosh, did you see what these numbers are going to be and so forth? So, it's an attention grabber. Where we sit right now is the Department of Transportation basically ran their numbers and they said we are short something like $3 billion for the 6 years ahead. And that's usually the window of time the Department of Transportation sort of projects out. They have a queue of projects that we're doing planning money this year, and then the initial construction money is in the following year, and then the bulk of the construction money is in year 3, and then other things are on their own timetable. So they're always thinking in terms of a 6-year plan. And right now, with a confluence of factors, they're short by a big sounding number, right? $3.3 billion is a big deal. So the plan is to go area by area and nip and tuck. I think the Appropriations Committee felt like just saying we're going to reduce funds that support local transportation needs didn't tell a sufficient story. But they heard from Mayor Scott about the effects in Baltimore and what transportation funds mean as a matter of quality of life in Baltimore. They heard from Johnny Olszewski from Baltimore County, who's also the MACO president, and could tell the story from the county perspective about how far behind we are with highway user revenue distributions. That's gas tax and so forth collected by the state that goes to locals to pay for maintenance of our roads and bridges. And he told that story, and you could look around the room. There are delegates, just like it sounds like an exaggeration, but they were in rapt attention, listening to the county executive, listening to the mayor, even listening to little old me talk about the history of highway user revenues and what these cuts would mean in that context. I mean, we'd be left with, we have no local transportation revenue source. There's no gas tax. There's no titling fee that goes to your county or to your town. We're entirely reliant on the state for these funds. So this is quality of life stuff. It's safety, it's service. And I think the committee heard a clear story that these cutbacks, which the governor has basically found some money to stave them off for this year, but they're still in that reconciliation plan. And the reconciliation bill still calls for a permanent reduction in highway user revenues that we just wouldn't feel for this year because they've got the money to patch it over.
Right.
Yeah, it was a big briefing. They spent a lot of time on it, and the committee, I think, came away with a sense of the real gravity here. It was a pretty good show.
I thought so too, and I can tell you that's not normally the case where everyone is like at attention and listening. But certainly for that briefing, that was the case, and I agree with you. And Michael, I mean, it feels like this is the beginning of this whole debate, right? That really did set the stage. We know the Transportation Trust Fund has a shortfall. It's very serious. We know they need to make changes, project cutbacks, reduce services, cuts for locals. I mean, in some ways, the administration put it all on the table, right? They said, look, we ran the numbers. Here's what it is. Here's what we need to cut to make this work. And I think everyone can understand that. I do think that from a local government perspective, it stings a little bit more. All these cuts sting, but particularly you mentioned highway user revenue. And back in the mid 2000s, we had a recession. The state, they took a lot of that money away and they diverted it from local roads. And, over the years, we've made some progress, and we just made big progress a couple years ago. And so for local governments to see these cuts on the table and, taking highway user and cutting it back to before we made this deal and everybody was happy with it, and it was getting us back in a good direction. And then to come back just a few years later and say, well, actually, no, we're not doing that. I think that was absolutely a sting for a lot of local governments and a lot of the work that's gone toward restoring highway users. So again, I think it's a big deal. We understand the situation. We understand the Transportation Trust Fund. There are a lot of factors that go into the shortfall and shifting to EVs and having less gas tax revenue. Of course, all these things certainly create the issue. But again, I just think anytime you look at cuts of that magnitude, it's certainly going to grab people's attention.
Right. I don't think the governor and his fiscal staff are taking joy in doing program cuts, right? I don't think there's malice here. It's just, you're dealt a tough hand. You got to play it as best you can. So, cutbacks like this are serious, and they remain on the table. I mean, the good news this week was, the governor made an announcement early this week to a number of local government leaders saying we're going to take some money out of the general fund. There'll be more pressure on our general fund budget, but we're going to try and patch over these transportation cuts for this year, but we still need the structural changes for the long haul, and that's going to affect things like local transit programs and especially highway user revenue. So the committee kept using this phrase that we've got a Band-Aid. And I think that's an apt description, right? There's no argument that the one-time money for FY25 to not feel the pain right away is not a long-term solution, and everybody recognizes that. So that we've got reckoning to do on transportation first, and then consequences for the whole rest of the budget. I think this issue is still here. It's not gone, and like whether there's a structural solution that can come together as rapidly as this session, I don't know. But the stay of execution for some of these local programs maybe is a window to learn to sort of accelerate that along.
Right. And so I think that was a good place to start, because really those cuts set the tone for the budget season. And we knew, again, in August, the governor did make that clear. He set that tone early, right on the stage at the summer conference. So right. That was very deliberate, as you said earlier, Michael, and, true to his word, things are tough. So let's get into the budget writ large. We don't want to drown our listeners in numbers, but here are a few. And Michael, I'll go through a few of these, and we're going to have footage on our blog, and we'll link all of that so you can look at all the charts and whatnot. But Michael, the total budget, so all funds, is actually down close to 2% from last year. It's about $63 billion. And that makes sense, because we know that budgets over the past few years have kind of been buoyed by a lot of these federal funds that are now out the window.
Yeah. So, and I mean, the total budget is kind of an overstated figure, but yeah, that includes money for higher education, includes a lot of other stuff. So it's the big number, even though a lot of our focus will end up being on the general fund, right? Mm-hmm. And the stuff that's like mostly connected to that. So yep, right. down slightly. That's not a huge shock given the setting we're in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the budget also reduces the structural deficit by about a third. It's around $260 million. So structural deficit, that's ongoing spending. That you have a structural deficit when you've committed to spend more money than you actually have. And so this budget does reduce the structural deficit by about a third. So that's good news. It also maintains a 9.4% balance in the rainy day fund. It adds funds for the blueprint, which is increasing over $400 million. And it has about $1.75 billion in capital bonds. That is a bump of about $500 million over the last year. So Michael, there are a lot of minor headlines that will come out in the detailed analyses soon. And again, we'll have a lot of coverage on our blog, but that's a pretty good summary, I think, of the top line numbers.
Yeah, like the newspapers are going to cover the high level stuff. And then I think we'll see, the analysts over the course of the weeks ahead. What happens with the budget bill is the House Appropriations Committee, their counterparts in the Senate, or the Budget and Taxation Committee, and they'll go agency by agency through the spending plan and sort of like ask these, talk about what's the challenge here, what's the extra thing they're asking for, what's going on with this personnel issue, blah, blah, blah. So it's an accountability process, but it's also the legislature, refining and sometimes cutting the budget that's been proposed to them. So that'll get geared up for the weeks ahead. And there's a legion of staff who work for the legislature who sort of help the legislature do this analysis and dig into these issues and so forth. So that happens for the next several weeks. There's some quirky things in the budget usually. Like last year, it felt like they had some one-time money. So when the state did something like, as I recall, they knew that they had transportation issues looming, and so they put money into a reserve fund, a little extra money into that education trust fund to pay for education and blueprint expenses down the road, and try and prepare for those costs. But when you spend the money out of the general fund and put it into a special fund, nominally that's spending money in the budget. So there's always a little bit of like, it's not the same thing as mom and pop and the family sitting around the kitchen table, talking about the household budget and what money comes in and what goes out. The state budget is a bit more complicated, as well as having more zeros on the end. The budget is the spending plan, and the reconciliation bill is the legislation that makes other changes to statutes and formulas and stuff like that. We don't see proposals here for increased taxes, tax rates, or things of that nature. So there's not really a major revenue component in this plan. It's mostly tightening the belt and narrowing down spending where they can. So that's if that wasn't, I think that's what we anticipated, but still to see it in print, sort of answer some unspoken questions about, hey, is this going to be a year when the governor is going to call for that sort of thing? So legislature still has its own opportunity at fiscal issues, and we don't know the directions they may head. But the governor's plan doesn't call for higher taxes to bring this in line.
Right. And that is a fascinating political debate. And, if you're in Annapolis, what is the House going to do? What is the Senate going to do? It seems like maybe they're on a different page, but it's clear from the governor that they do not propose any new taxes. I think we will see a lot of fees. And I think you mentioned that a lot of reliance on user fees in various bills. So, that's money, but it's not a tax increase. And Michael, I think from the local government perspective, the biggest issue, of course, we've already talked about is the permanent transportation cuts to highway user revenue and local transit. But there are a few other things that got our attention and will as the session goes on. Community colleges get dinged in this proposal, and the way they're doing it this year, Michael, seems strange, and it's definitely different from what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, it is a little different. And I mean, this happens sometimes, but the most common way that governors in years past have used the budget reconciliation bill, or the BRFA, as a way to make this year's budget or like the next 2 years budget balance out, is times get tight and you do something like, hey, here's a mandated funding program, or here's a formula that's on its way, or it's calculated a certain way each year or whatever. And frequently it's like, hey, we have to pause these increases. We can't afford to take this step this year. So the FY25 number, we're just not going to be able to get there until 27. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we see most conventionally in a reconciliation bill. Basically, we've got the policy right. We just can't quite afford it today. So let's delay it. Let's take a pause or take a year off or that sort of thing. But the governor used the term rebase, which is not a term that mom and pop at the kitchen table use an awful lot. Used that number a number of times in making his public presentation of the budget. And that seems to be what the proposal is for our community colleges, different than just wait a year or take a delay, right?
Right. So what they're doing in the BRFA, they're wiping out the current funding level. So the current formula that funds community colleges, they're wiping that out permanently and saying, we're writing a new formula. Here's the new funding level, the new base, so to speak. So when you talk about rebasing, that's what we're talking about. That's the term. Rebasing, it means, in essence, this is the new normal. So instead of the nip and tuck, and maybe not this year, but next year, in the BRFA now, they are saying we're going to abandon the long-standing formula that funds community colleges, and we're going to write a new one, and it's going to be less generous in terms of how much money is flowing to community colleges. So obviously that's something we're going to keep an eye on. But Michael, again, these are local community colleges. I think that, I think we're going to advocate that they don't get cut. Obviously, they're doing a lot of really good things at the local level, and they've been instrumental throughout the pandemic. They're part of the blueprint. So look, there are tough decisions out there, and we understand that. But this one is a little bit, again, it hurts a little bit more because not only are you saying we're just going to delay some money that would have come to you for a few years, this is saying, no, we're just going to rebase the formula. And now in perpetuity, you're going to receive less money than you did before, and you're going to need to make it work. That obviously creates problems. And for community colleges, I mean, really, they get their funding from three sources, right? It's the state, it's the county government, and then it's student tuition and fees. And typically in the past, the state has not ever met its number until recently. And in those scenarios, oftentimes the community colleges will go to the county and say, hey, we don't have enough. We need help. The state's not doing it, and the counties have stepped up. You've already talked about, Michael, when it comes to transportation, counties are in a tough spot. There's not a lot of money under the couch cushions. We've already flipped all the couch cushions. So it's going to be way less likely that the county's going to be able to step up and kind of backfill that. So I think that conversation is going to be an interesting one, Michael, throughout the session. But, higher ed, anytime you want to make cuts to higher ed, particularly community colleges, which are anchor institutions across the state, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow.
I agree. And as a matter of public policy, like squeezing higher education, I mean, like tough budget times call for difficult choices. And so it's not, again, I don't think, the governor has it in for the 2-year colleges thinking they're a bad deal, right? I don't think it's anything like that. It's just you got to economize and prioritize. But when you squeeze higher education, like that frequently translates to higher tuition and fees. So you end up the people who are going to gain new skills and advance themselves for a better role in the workplace. If this ends up being, well, now the tuition per credit hour is going to go up by 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever. Sarah and I did a whole podcast episode 2 or 3 months ago about the concept of when is a user pay principle sensible public policy, and things like the gas tax to pay for roads is a classic case of that. I mean, paying tuition that covers at least part of the costs of your own education offering is the classic user fee. And generally speaking, high user fees diminish participation. So you wouldn't want to have a really high user fee on something like an immunization, where it's important that the whole community get a shot so people don't get sick, right? You don't want to have the measles shot be expensive to people. So you don't want that to be a user pays. Education is just one of those areas where it's difficult because the back end, if this means higher tuition for people who want to advance themselves, with their careers, with their work opportunity, it's hard to saddle it on them. Yeah.
No doubt. And I mean, we know that community colleges are very, very powerful contributors to workforce development. Again, they are a central piece of the blueprint and career paths. So, I mean, look, these are people getting credentials to get a better job or career. And I don't think you want to make that fall out of reach. So anyway, again, times are tough. We understand there are tough decisions on the table, but I do think community colleges, I mean, for them, this is going to be like $25 million. So it's not the biggest piece in the budget, but they're going to feel it. And we want to make sure that they have everything they need to get support, particularly, again, because the state only recently met its funding obligation for our local community colleges. And you're talking about going all the way back into the 90s and, when the state was supposed to get there, and they finally did just recently. So again, it's a ding. And I know the community colleges are going to show up and talk about what that would mean for them, but certainly we want to support them and make sure that they have what they need to do the good work that they do. Michael, disparity grants. Also, we see a drop here in the budget, and that's really just compounding the challenges that some of our lower income jurisdictions face in affording big ticket items like the blueprint. And this is cash that basically goes right into their funding for education. So disparity grants, if you see a drop of $7 to $8 million each to Baltimore and Prince George's County, that's just another log on a fire there.
Right. I think that's right. I mean, the whole idea of the disparity grant is that the state has said the counties need to have a local income tax. You're going to use that as a principal revenue source. But the weakness in that is some jurisdictions can apply even the maximum income tax rate and not get very much juice for it because they just don't have a lot of high income earners. So the state says, we recognize that that's kind of a weakness in using local income taxes. You still need to provide services in those places. So if you levy your income tax, and there's sort of different tiers of this, but the state will help bring you a little closer to the state average to get a little more juice out of your local income taxes. And I don't think that what we've seen, I haven't seen the math on this, but I'm pretty confident that the smaller numbers in the disparity grant is not somebody saying, we don't think this program is worthy, or we're going to put some artificial cap on it. I think it's just how the math works out. Every year, the counties are measured relative to a state average, and that bobs around a little bit. But like you said, $7 or $8 million to each of Baltimore City and Prince George's County, and then several other jurisdictions losing meaningful money to them too, even if it's only $500,000 in a small county, that can be a really big deal. It's just how the formula works. But one thing is that, like, this formula doesn't have any sort of guardrails that sometimes the state puts into programs to avoid this sort of thing happening. You just fall off a cliff.
No, absolutely. And many programs have things like a hold harmless, but not here. So hold harmless would mean that you're not going to get any less than you did the year before. And in this case, of course, we're seeing cuts. And I agree. I think it's just the way the formula works out. So you input the numbers and the program spits out how much each jurisdiction is going to get. So again, I don't think there's anything nefarious here, but I certainly think it's worth a look to see if the disparity grant program, which again, for low wealth counties who do the right thing on the income tax, and all this money is going straight to education, Michael. So really, I mean, this is just less dollars for education. These counties have to find it somewhere else. So I'm hopeful that we can have a conversation about the disparity grant and potentially adding a whole harmless provision there. But Michael, we'll see if it gets sensitive. We'll see if it gets traction. But
Yeah.
I do think this is one that typically people pay attention to because they understand, that these counties. I mean, we had one county with people particularly who don't like tax increases, right? This county, all three of their commissioners raised taxes in an election year just so they would be eligible to get an extra chunk of state money through the disparity grant. So this is, these counties are stepping up, doing the right thing, getting as much as they can to fund these really important programs. To me, it's just, a little untoward to see a cut in the disparity grant. But again, hopefully there'll be a conversation there and this picks up traction a bit.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and it's just one of those issues, right? Like that's dispiriting. If you're some of our friends that work in the budget office in a place like Prince George's County, where remember they got that weird curveball in the spring of last year, and suddenly they fell out of eligibility for an awful large wave of education assistance. So for them, being able to afford the blueprint for for the year we're in right now, last year's budget, became like $70 million harder. And so, they're like, we use euphemisms like couch cushions and so forth, but like Prince George's County, Baltimore City, I think both went to their reserves. Like they're eating seed corn to be able to fund their education commitment. Like they want the blueprint to work. They want these deliverables for the kids in the schools, but the cash is just difficult. So, and then a twist like this, now you're 8 million short on top of wherever you were, which is probably perplexing already. It's just like one more log on the fire, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, look, the bottom line is, we mentioned Baltimore City and Prince George's, so we'll just use them again. They don't have anywhere else to go. The only place that they can go to raise revenue is the property tax. Everybody hates the property tax. We've talked about that before on this podcast. Why? Right. And so also the property tax is regressive, right? So essentially, counties are being asked to fund all these very, very progressive ideas with a regressive tax because that's the only option on the table. Both Prince George's and Baltimore City are maxed out on the local income tax rate at 3.2%. There's nowhere else to go to raise real money except for the property tax. So again, that's the situation counties find themselves in. The state is facing pressures with its own budget, so the state understands. But, Michael, I think right now, as we've said, sort of winding this back a bit, right now the state does not need to take drastic action. They can make this year work. They can make the next few years work and not have to raise real revenue or cut real money. But we know that they're going to eventually have to make that decision. Are we going to raise revenue or are we going to cut services? And so that's coming. And for a lot of counties, I think they're already in that position, right? Because they don't have the flexibility that the state has, and they don't have the flexibility to go out there and find revenue. So that really sets the stage, I think, Michael, for the next few years ahead. I mean, looking through the rest of the budget, you can tell this was very well thought out. They've made it work in tough times without raising revenue. They should get a pat on the back for that.
Yep.
There are a few tucks from where we sit that things we'd like to see change, but overall, Michael, it's a good budget, and I haven't heard a ton of people making noise about it. I mean, obviously there are tough decisions. Obviously, we have some gripes, but at the end of the day, in the fiscal situation we're currently in, I have to say, I mean, I haven't read through all of it. You said earlier there are big books and they're all on my desk, and there's a lot to go through. But that stuff's coming. We're going to have a ton of blog coverage as we go through the session and things evolve here. But the bottom line is both the counties and the state are feeling the pressure, and something's got to give, right, on the county level and the state level. And we're walking into that for the next few years. That's going to be the situation as far as we can tell for now, absent of another pandemic or something crazy, hopefully not, knock on wood. But that's where we are, and that's going to be the fiscal picture for the next few years. So buckle up. Things are going to get a little bit tighter and tougher, I think, even than they are now.
Yeah, I think that wraps it up. That's the setting that we're in. It's the hand we've been dealt. So it's going to be tight times. But I agree with you. I think the plan that sits before the legislature now gives them a reasonable starting point for what to do for this year. And like you mentioned early on, this makes a pretty big dent in what was a structural deficit. You have to balance this year's budget and that's the constitutional requirement. They pass a budget for next year that is balanced, but that can include sometimes like one-time things that make, you can find some one-time resources that make this year's budget work, but they don't return. And some of your spending problems do return as long as you continue to hire the same employees, you provide the same services to the same universe of people and so forth. So that's where that structural deficit issue comes from. They're making a dent in that. They've got a plan that's balanced for the moment, and they're starting to go through those tough choices. The legislature is going to need to be on board with a number of these things, or to basically fashion their own alternatives. And that's what sits before us for the next 70 some days, right?
Yes, so I'm looking forward to it, and we love session. Michael, when are we going to get back in for Conduit Street After Dark? We've been doing at least a few of those over the past few sessions, and things get a little saucy. You let Michael, we let him go a little bit. I think we're going to need a few of those soon because, man, there are a lot of giant issues that counties are front and center for this session, and a lot of long nights. And I feel like that's gonna lend well to Conduit Street After Dark and everyone's favorite.
Maybe. All right. I can steel myself and get ready. We'll get the ice cubes going.
Saddle up. Get the ice cubes going. Get everything in place. We're going to leave it there for today. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all of these episodes will be sent directly to the device of your choice. You can also follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, you should be reading the Conduit Street blog every single day. There's always new content every day, especially during the session, so keep an eye on that. But for Michael Sanderson, this is Kevin Kinnally signing off, and we will talk to you soon.